PGA Tour is cracking at the top. Blame points straight at Rory McIlroy. Days ago, he stunned Royal Birkdale. The fire inside him is dying. He admitted it out loud. That confession shook the sport. The timing was brutal. Now rewind a few weeks. Rory had already dropped a bombshell. It still echoes today. He exposed the rot in Brian Rolapp's grand rebuild. A new tier got branded a glorified minor league. Rolapp arrived from the NFL to save golf. His biggest star torched the plan on camera. The disrespect was public. Then Rory disappeared into private player talks. Nobody was meant to hear them. What happened in that room stayed sealed. Then everything flipped. It came fast. The critic became a cheerleader overnight. That reversal makes no sense. Dig deeper, though. The flip reveals who truly controls this sport. Rolapp owns the title. The leverage sits with Rory. One private conversation exposed that balance. The rest is damage control. Fans already smell it. The theories exploded online. We're about to prove the part headquarters buried. Before the breakdown, do this. Tap subscribe so the next reveal reaches you first. Here is who really runs the PGA Tour. The answer sits uncomfortably with everyone in Ponte Vedra Beach because the man wielding real influence does not hold the grandest job title. To see how one golfer sees that grip, rewind to the moment the whole feud ignited. Shinnecock Hills hosted the U.S. Open in June, and McIlroy walked into a routine pre-tournament press conference that quickly stopped being routine. Reporters pressed him on the competitive overhaul the tour planned to reveal within days. He refused to soften his answer. Instead, he aimed straight at the proposed lower division, the so-called Track 2, and dismissed it as a glorified Corn Ferry event. That phrase spread across the sport before he even left the podium. The jab carried weight because of what surrounded it. Golf's leadership had spent months constructing a restructuring it billed as the biggest change in generations. A committee chaired by Tiger Woods, the Future Competitions Committee, had shaped the blueprint. The plan splits the professional ranks into two tiers from 2028 onward. A premium championship series would house the elite. Beneath it would sit a second-tier challenger series with promotion and relegation deciding movement between them. The no-cut signature events that defined recent seasons would vanish under the new design. Rolapp had also floated a leaner calendar and a match play twist for the postseason, part of 6 broad themes his committee laid out earlier in the year. On paper, it promised clarity and meritocracy. Rory's verdict framed it very differently. His specific worry landed on the National Opens. He raised the Canadian Open as an example, warning that a historic championship could be shoved down into the lesser tier. To a purist, relegating a storied event beside the sport's fresh corporate machinery felt close to sacrilege. The comment resonated because Rory was not some fringe voice sniping from the outside. He had served on the policy board. For years, he had fronted the tour through its ugliest battles against LIV Golf. When a figure of that standing brands your flagship reform a minor league knockoff, the damage cuts to the bone. Timing sharpened the wound further. Brian Rolapp had scheduled his grand announcement for the following week at TPC River Highlands, ahead of the Travelers Championship. He arrived as the tour's first ever chief executive, an outsider plucked from more than 2 decades inside the NFL, where he built his reputation as a media and business operator during American football's global surge. The board hired him to modernize a fractured product and eventually to heal the rift with the Saudi-backed rebels. He is set to assume the commissioner role fully in January 2027, taking the reins from Jay Monahan after a decade in charge. His entire debut hinged on selling this overhaul. Having the sport's most bankable name torch it days ahead of the reveal threatened to sink the launch before it began. This was not the first time the incoming boss had courted him in private. Back in March, before sketching the plan's earliest outline at the Players' Championship, Rolapp spent an hour on the phone with McIlroy, walking him through the presentation ahead of the assembled media. The pattern told its own story. When the most important messages needed a friendly reception, the executive reached for Rory first, hoping to convert the sport's loudest voice into an ally rather than a critic. So the same instinct kicked in at the Travelers. On the day of his big presentation, Rolapp pulled Rory aside for a private conversation. He confirmed as much to reporters afterward, acknowledging that the two had spoken directly that very morning. What passed between them has never been disclosed. No transcript exists. A leak has never surfaced. The only certainty is that a quiet exchange took place between the incoming boss and the player, threatening to derail his signature project. Then the tone shifted completely. Rather than doubling down, McIlroy released a supportive statement praising the announcement as a positive step for professional golf. He welcomed the emphasis on meritocracy and applauded the idea of putting supporters first. The man who had ridiculed the plan as a discount circuit suddenly sounded like its spokesman. He skipped the Travelers that week, yet his statement carried further than any appearance could have, softening the very controversy he had created 7 days earlier. Rolapp, for his part, used the podium to dismantle the Korn Ferry comparison with cold precision. He insisted the event count would stay flat at 47 before and after the change, serving roughly the same 230 players it already supports. He argued the Challenger Series would unfold at recognizable venues, carry healthy purses, and feature a subset of the same established professionals rather than developmental hopefuls. In his telling, nothing shrank. The ecosystem simply got reorganized into a cleaner competitive story for fans and sponsors to follow. On the surface, harmony returned. Look closer, though, and the reconciliation exposes something the tour would prefer to keep quiet. A rank-and-file member does not publicly humiliate an incoming commissioner, earn a same-day private audience, and then watch that commissioner spend his marquee press conference reassuring the public. That sequence does not describe an employee falling in line. It reveals an executive managing a partner he cannot afford to lose. The leverage never belonged to the office. It sat with the player. Consider what genuine influence looks like inside a sport, and the evidence stacks up fast. Ordinary members bite their tongues about tour politics, fearful of the consequences. Rory said the harshest thing imaginable about the boss's pet project and paid no price whatsoever. The response from headquarters was not discipline. It was outreach. Rolapp came to him, not the reverse, and the resulting narrative bent toward calm rather than confrontation. Few athletes in any league command that kind of gravitational pull. The clearest proof arrived a month later, and it reframes the entire saga. At Royal Birkdale during the Open Championship in July, McIlroy delivered the confession that opened this story. He admitted his hunger for regular competition had faded. Standard tour stops, he suggested, no longer carried the significance they once held for him. He hinted at an extended break before returning. For a player who once treated every start as a mission, the change was startling. The numbers underline how far he has pulled back. Since capturing the Masters at Augusta National in April, his second green jacket in as many years, and a feat only 4 men have ever managed, McIlroy had teed up in barely 6 PGA Tour events. Across that stretch, he posted no top 5 finishes. His participation dropped so low that he risked missing the 15-event threshold the tour sets for its full members. And here, the leverage becomes impossible to ignore. Reports emerged that the tour intended to lean on a rule loophole to grant him a pass, sparing its biggest attraction from the standard requirement. Sit with that arrangement for a second. The organization, preparing to enforce a strict 2-tier hierarchy, built entirely around merit and accountability, appeared ready to waive its own participation rule for one man. The structure Rolapp keeps selling insists everyone earns and retains status through performance and presence. Yet the sport's marquee figure looked poised to skip the fine print and keep every privilege intact. Rules built for the many were reportedly flexing for a single privileged name. That contradiction is the beating heart of Rolapp's dilemma. His pitch rests on fairness and a level playing field, yet his most valuable asset embodies the exception that undercuts the message. He cannot discipline McIlroy without alienating the audience that follows golf largely because of him. Enforcing the schedule minimum on his headline draw would invite accusations of hypocrisy from every journeyman forced to grind for a card. So the incoming commissioner is left threading an impossible needle, promising rigor to the field while quietly accommodating the one name that keeps the lights on. McIlroy's willingness to speak bluntly only widens the gap. During that same open week at Royal Birkdale, he tangled publicly with Bryson DeChambeau over a rules flashpoint, drawing headlines that had nothing to do with his scorecard. The row centered on a penalty dispute during the second round, and it swallowed coverage meant for the leaders. A former representative later suggested he had overstepped with those remarks. Whether or not the criticism was fair, the episode reinforced a familiar pattern. Rory shapes the conversation around professional golf far more than his recent results justify, and he does it whether the establishment welcomes the intrusion or not. He also proved he can lend the tour enormous credibility when he chooses to. Around the same window, the circuit announced a fresh partnership, linking it with the DP World Tour and the Asian Tour, a move widely read as a strategic blow to LIV Golf's global ambitions. McIlroy publicly endorsed the alliance, and his backing carried the weight of 1,000 press releases. That is the paradox Rolapp inherited. The same voice capable of torpedoing a reform can, days later, hand the tour a public relations victory simply by nodding along. Even the postseason has felt his fingerprints. The tour recently overhauled its FedEx Cup climax, slashing the headline bonus that once handed the champion $25 million and spreading the money across the season instead. Fans noticed the shrunken prize immediately, and the grumbling never died down. McIlroy has openly questioned whether the revamped Tour Championship format actually works, and his skepticism this month kept the debate alive when the organization would rather move on. A quieter star would let such gripes fade. He keeps them burning. Contrast his approach with Scottie Scheffler, and the difference in temperament becomes obvious. Scheffler welcomed Rolapp's arrival by pointing to the value of hiring a heavyweight straight out of the NFL. He offered measured observations about smaller fields and shifting formats, rarely reaching for a headline-grabbing line. The world's steadiest player picks his battles carefully. McIlroy, by contrast, treats the microphone as a lever, and that instinct hands him a cultural weight no ranking can measure. Some observers frame the July confession less as rebellion and more as a natural chapter of a storied career. The respected analyst Paul McGinley suggested that McIlroy's legacy is already secure, and that a champion with a young family and completed ambitions will inevitably reorder his priorities. Under that reading, the fading fire is simply life catching up with a man who has conquered nearly everything the sport offers. The interpretation is generous and probably accurate, yet it does nothing to solve Rolapp's problem. A contented, semi-detached superstar is still a superstar the tour cannot function without. Trace the arc, and the picture sharpens. He fired a public broadside. The boss summoned him the same day. Within a week, his stance reversed. Then came the reported pass on the 15-event rule. Each beat pointed the same direction, and together they laid bare the true balance of authority inside the modern PGA Tour. The incoming commissioner arrived with sweeping plans and an NFL playbook. He discovered that the sport's center of gravity answers to a Northern Irishman with a driver and a microphone. None of this guarantees open warfare ahead. The two men appear cordial in public, and their interests overlap in obvious ways. Rolapp needs a healthy, unified circuit that showcases stars like McIlroy. For Rory, the appeal is a product worth caring about as he weighs how much competitive fire remains. Their alignment could hold, yet the underlying reality lingers beneath every handshake. When the boss and his biggest employee disagree, it is the executive who adjusts first. That truth will shadow every negotiation Rolapp faces, from the fine print of the 2028 tiers to the looming question of whether the Saudi money ever returns to the table. The bigger danger for Rolapp is not a single fiery quote. It is a slow, quiet drift. A superstar who plays a shrinking schedule, invests less of himself, and still commands the room can hollow out a reform from the inside without ever raising his voice again. If McIlroy keeps trimming his calendar while the tour bends further to accommodate him, the meritocracy Rolapp promised risks becoming a story the sport tells rather than a system it lives. Every exception granted to the marquee name chips away at the credibility of the structure beneath it. That is the real headline buried under the drama. A new leader inherited a kingdom and quickly learned the throne comes with a caveat. The crown may sit on Rolapp's head, but the crowd still turns toward Rory. Whether the incoming commissioner can convert his blueprint into reality now depends less on boardroom approval and far more on keeping one restless, brilliant, half-checked-out champion invested in the outcome. If this breakdown gave you a sharper read on the power games shaping golf's future, do me a favor before you go. Tap that subscribe button. Share your verdict in the comments on whether McIlroy holds too much sway over the men in charge, and stick with the channel, because the standoff between the tour's new boss and its most powerful player is only beginning to unfold.